Hi everyone, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles, a series of books and videos on American history as seen through the lives of the presidents of the United States. This episode is from the life of John Quincy Adams, and the focus is to the House. The year is 1829, and Adams has just finished his one-term presidency. He's kind of bitter on the way out the door. He followed in his father's footsteps by not showing up to his successor's inauguration, in this case in the form of Andrew Jackson. Adams had moved out of the White House a day early and decided to stay away from the festivities. And he actually had a lot more on his mind about a month later, personal anguish with the early loss of his son, George, his oldest son. It was not easy being the son of John Adams or John Quincy Adams. John Quincy felt this with his siblings who did not do well. In fact, his brother Charles became an alcoholic and died right at the end of his father's term as president. Well, now just after his own term, his own son, also struggling with alcoholism, struggling with staying up with the expectations of his father. He had just fathered an illegitimate child that he was trying to cover up, but he couldn't afford. And eventually, one night in April of 1829, he was on a ship. He jumped overboard, committing suicide and ending his life at the age of 28. The father, who was a very harsh father, he did not take kindly to the fact that George wasn't able to live up to his own expectations. In fact, this was an area that John Quincy and Louisa Adams actually differed. She was much more sympathetic to her children. The father was not sympathetic, frankly, at all, continued to express those high expectations. Although when his son died, he did say, "My thoughts are so wandering that I distrust the operation of my own reason." He was absolutely distraught by the loss, but he was sort of unable to do anything to sort of save his son, who was struggling under all these expectations, and then the alcohol took over. He just didn't have the answer for his son, who committed suicide at the age of 28. Well, Adams's father retired after his presidency and still lived 25 more years, mostly in retirement at home, in their home in Massachusetts called Peacefield. But that was not going to be the fate of John Quincy Adams. In this one case, his father's career and his career diverged considerably, because within a year of Adams leaving the White House, he was approached to run for Congress, and he was open to the idea. He said in October of 1830 that if my fellow citizens of the district should think proper to call for such services as it may be in my power to render them, by representing them in the 22nd Congress, I am not aware of any sound principle which would justify me in withholding them. So he was open to the idea. He runs for Congress, he wins the seat easily, wins 71% of the vote, and he becomes the only president in American history to serve in the House of Representatives after his presidency is over, and he does so for the rest of his life, the last 17 years of his career and his existence. Well, things had continued to evolve in Congress. That two-party system that had gone away for a little while was basically back now, and Henry Clay, who had been Adams's Secretary of State, very much aligned with him on a lot of policy areas, Clay was really driving the institution called the Whigs, which was the opposition party to Andrew Jackson and the Democrats. And it was John Quincy Adams much more aligned with the Whigs in terms of the American system, federally funded internal improvements, high protective tariffs. But at the same time, Adams was always independent. You could never pin him in direction of one party versus the other, because his own independent thoughts would almost inevitably come out. So while he was hostile to a number of the things coming from the Jackson administration, who clearly was his political enemy, in certain cases he was strongly in favor of the position of the administration. One example had to do with the French, who were looking to renegotiate a long-term debt of around $25 million that they owed the United States. And President Jackson was adamant year after year, "I'm not renegotiating. You owe us this money and we expect you to pay it." Congress was kind of waffling on the topic. They just wanted to get it behind them, at least some of them, and were willing to perhaps renegotiate. And John Quincy Adams said absolutely no. He said, "Sir, if we do not unite with the President of the United States in an effort to compel the French Chamber of Deputies to carry out the provisions of this treaty, we shall become the scorn, the contempt, the derision, and the reproach of all mankind." Do it, and soon you will find your flag insulted, dishonored, and trodden in the dust. And he got the support of his congressman to the tune of 210-0, voted with Adams to support this position. Adams was blown away by the fact he had this unanimous vote. He wrote his own son Charles, "I will not attempt to describe my feelings. You cannot perhaps conceive them. It was one of those moments that compensate for a lifetime of suffering." In other words, Adams was mostly not supported by things like Congress or even the public, and to have this unanimous support on something he felt so passionate about, he felt really good about. Another area where Adams sided with the administration had to do with a law that he had signed when he was president. And this was called the Tariff of Abominations, the Tariff of 1828, that the South abhorred. They thought it was a sellout to the North. It was putting them at an economic disadvantage. And the state of South Carolina took things one step further. They followed the paths of Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, who had sought to nullify federal laws back in 1798. Well, with their own nullification proclamation in the early 1830s over the Tariff of Abominations. They declared that that federal law was inoperable within their borders. And John Quincy Adams sided with President Jackson in saying this cannot stand. Adams said, "As destitute of foundation as the forms and substance of their proceedings are arrogant, overbearing, tyrannical, and oppressive," talking about the Nullification Proclamation from South Carolina, "that one particle of compromise with that usurped power or of concession to its pretensions would be a heavy calamity to the people of the whole Union. That such concession would directly lead to the final and irretrievable dissolution of the Union." He was more than adamant that you can't give in to a single state trying to nullify federal law. That just can't work in this system of government. And once again, siding with ostensibly his own political enemy, President Andrew Jackson, Quincy Adams was coming forward with a very strong defense. Now, in Congress, they talked about having what's called a force bill, which was passed, that gave President Jackson the ability to send in the military to actually enforce the law of the land. Fortunately, there was a compromise behind the scene that eventually saw those tariff rates come down just enough for the South Carolinians to cancel their nullification vote. But this was another area where John Quincy Adams felt very strongly about a topic. Party alignment was irrelevant. His own political enemy was irrelevant. It was the right thing to do, and he came out in favor of the president against nullification. Now, Adams did have another political opportunity. He was nominated for governor of Massachusetts in 1833, and he agreed to run. But similar to his own presidential race in 1824, there was no majority winner. So it went to the state legislature to resolve it. And at this point, Adams withdrew. Maybe he didn't want to go through that again, and he passed on the governorship, which went to Congressman John Davis. Now, some believe John Quincy Adams' greatest calling might have been at the end of his career, where he becomes, on the floor of the House of Representatives, an outspoken opponent of slavery at a critical time in the nation's history. But that is the story for another day. That is John Quincy Adams, and To the House, from the life of John Quincy Adams. For more Presidential Chronicles, check out my books on Amazon.com, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Until next time, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles.